Well, I think the idea of devolution for London is a good idea. Give London more control of its own tax base. The one idea I didn't hear in the film just then was the idea of actually letting London keep some of its business rates, or at least keep the business rate uplift from the starting point.
That is in there as well, actually.
That's a good idea.
Broadly, what about the others that you're hearing there? What would you do? Income tax, VAT. You heard what Tony Travers says there. It's getting a portion of it that's raised in London.
That's right. Well, I think the idea is to have a starting point that is fiscally neutral. So you start off where we are now, and then if some of these taxes grow, meaning the economy's grown, they generate more receipts, London would keep that growth as an incentive for London's mayor and London's assembly to help London grow. For me, business rates is actually the most sensible one, because that is directly linked to encouraging business. The Chancellor, I think, has said that in the budget coming up this spring, he will be making a financial devolution offer to London and to the Mayor of London, and I would certainly support that, particularly in this area of business rates, where there are, I think, a lot of gains to be had.
Clive Ever, do you just sign up to all this?
Well, the issue on business rate, London's taken a big hit on business rate, money being taken out of London as a result of the government's changes. But I think this is a discussion that's overdue, because, I mean, I know it's becoming a bit of a cliche to say, in this sort of post-Brexit period, but London is a huge shop window for Britain. What this report is talking about is giving London the resources to generate that economic activity that is so vital for the whole country, and not cutting off the important redistribution of taxes from the economic activity that is concentrated around London and the South East. And that's a very important thing, and it gives London the devolved power to be able to make those decisions that will drive that forwards, and it's important that we do that.
What would you say about a tourism tax, though? Is that quite dangerous? Is that tricky? Does that put people off?
I think it is. It has to be looked at, I think, but I'd be very careful about how you do it, because we already have a very high rate of VAT compared with our European competitors, and what we want is more tourism to come here. So, I would look at possibly the government on areas like hospitality and things like that, looking to be more competitive with our European partners. For instance, it's half the rate, I think, in France, and bringing more tourism in.
Do you, just to be absolutely clear from you though, Chris, do you believe the government is committed to going anywhere near some of this stuff? Stamp duty, for instance, how much is raised in the capital. Why isn't a lot more of that retained?
Well, I think the list we've seen in the report by Tony Travers is a very long list of taxes, which adds up to a very large amount of money. There is a balance to strike, so I think it's right that London does get more control of its tax base. So I think things like business rates make sense. If you push it too far, as Clive was just saying, you then impede the government's ability to help out other parts of the country, bits of the southwest or the northwest, which do need a bit of help.
But then you also impede London and the vital infrastructure it wants.
Yeah, so that's why you need a balance. And I think what I hope the Chancellor does in his spring budget, and he said he will do this, there will be something in the spring budget that gives London more devolution. You've got to strike a balance between letting London keep a larger proportion of the taxes raised here. That is definitely right. But at the same time, giving the government the financial firepower to look after the whole United Kingdom. As a London MP, I do want to see the balance shift towards London, and I am very confident that we will see that in the spring budget.
OK, let's move on. Talking of money, the Mayor's budget proposals for next year are currently being poured over at City Hall, and there's been more talk about whether Sadiq Khan was as clear as he might have been when he promised to freeze fares. That did not, as it turned out, mean keeping all fares down, as those using trains and travel cards have found out.
Be much clearer.
Well, I think that, let's be clear, that he has frozen the fares for every fare for which he receives the fare box. So all the fares he has control over, he has frozen in line with his promise.
Should have been clear, though, that it isn't all fares, because some of the fares are wrapped up in travel cards.
Even the quote that was there about travel cards, when he said about people struggling to pay, he didn't then go on and say, oh, and we're going to freeze them. That he was saying that they were a problem for people. And the challenge here is for the government, who control the rail fares, to take the lead from the Mayor for London and freeze the fares. We're getting an appalling service. I mean, don't forget, the Conservative mayoral candidate went into the mayoral election saying they were going to put London's fares up by 17%.
Can I just be absolutely clear what the Labour candidate did, though? Should he have been absolutely clear he was only going to put up those TfL fares?
But he can only put up the fares for which he has the power to control.
But as we heard in that film, Transport for London had the impression that he meant all fares as well.
The figure that has been quoted is the figure that it would have cost TfL had the government frozen fares in line with the mayor's freeze on fares. That's the 600 million figure that's being bandied around. So it's a bit dishonest to suggest that that figure would cover the cost of subsidising fares of private rail providers in order to freeze the fares.
Let's be clear. Sadiq Khan grossly misled Londoners. What he said during the mayoral election campaign, he said no ifs, no buts. No one will pay a penny more. Nothing about TfL fares or travel cards or single fares. No one will pay a penny more is what he said. It quite simply is not true. But he's gone on after the mayoral election when he was trying to excuse what he's done. He claimed that he didn't have the power over these other fares. He claimed it was outside of his power to do a complete fare freeze. And what the...
he's also made it clear since then that he knows theoretically he could pay the toll.
Well,
why didn't you point this out before the election campaign?
We all pointed out that what he was promising was completely undeliverable, and he got into a big strop over it. We did say it was undeliverable. Now, when
for what reason, though? Why did you not point out the reason it was undeliverable and ask and be absolutely clear?
For financial reasons, and that is now what's happening, because he said after the election that he didn't have the power to do a complete freeze. This paper or this FOI request by London Travel Watch shows that TfL gave him advice that it was possible.
It shows it can be done because it was done with the help of government money, which froze the rail element, your government money, the rail element, the previous year. Now, he didn't know, he couldn't assume that that element was going to be there, could he?
Well, he could have, if he'd chosen to, he could have used City Hall money to have a complete fare freeze, and that is what the paper advised him, the TfL paper advised him he could do. Now, he chose not to do that. Now, you may agree or disagree with that, but he chose not to keep his promise, and then he tried to cover it up by claiming it was impossible.
Was he being disingenuous here, or was he ignorant about it when he didn't clarify this in the run-up to the election?
You'll have to ask him. I can't speak for him on that, whether he was ignorant of it, but it's quite evident that when you make a promise about freezing fares, you can only freeze those over which you have control. The increase on rail cards is a government decision. It's the government to follow the lead of the London mayor and freeze fares. And I would say to Chris, hang on a minute, Chris. The overground service is part of TfL and it is frozen. If the government were to hand over the franchises of suburban rail to Mayor Khan, those fares would be frozen.
Okay,
so you go and ring your friend, Chris Grayling, and get into
even Sadiq Khan has now accepted he could have frozen them by spending some money. Even Sadiq Khan has now accepted he could have frozen these fares if he had chosen to spend City Hall money on it. He has chosen to break his own promise.